In the year 1846, two famous poets travelled together to Italy. Their names were Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, his wife. The famous love story began in London at number 50 Wimpole Street. Elizabeth Barrett was an invalid. It is not certain what exactly was wrong with her, but her problems may have been partly due to psychological reasons. Her notorious father, Edward Moulton Barrett, was a very wealthy slave owner. He had 12 children, of whom Elizabeth was the eldest, and she was his favourite. His wife had died, which is hardly surprising. Edward Barrett's whole character was tyrannical, and he completely overpowered all his children. They were all financially dependent upon him and had no independence whatsoever. Elizabeth had a small legacy left to her by her mother, but as an invalid she was dependent upon her family. None of the children were allowed to marry. When one of Barrett's sons wished to marry, Edward Barrett reported triumphantly that he had made his son's knees ring upon the floor. Elizabeth was mainly confined to her bedroom, but now and again her brothers would carry her down to the drawing room to take tea, and later they would carry her upstairs again. Elizabeth was completely under her father's domination. He insisted that she take a certain drink, known as porter, every day. Elizabeth hated this drink, but her father said that this would be good for her health. It was an astounding fact that despite her situation, she became a popular poet. Edward Barrett was very proud of his daughter's fame, and he allowed visitors to come to the house to meet her at her bedside. Many famous people came to see Elizabeth Barrett, and because of this, her despotic father did not find anything strange in the visits of the poet Robert Browning. It would never have entered his head that Browning could have any romantic interest in Elizabeth. Because of Edward Barrett's desire to see celebrities visiting Elizabeth, Robert Browning was able to call upon Elizabeth as frequently as he wished. He sat next to Elizabeth at her bedside and read poetry to her. The only problem in Elizabeth's bedroom was her little dog, Flush. He was devoted to Elizabeth and slept on her bed all night. Flush became very jealous of Browning and on one occasion actually bit him. Elizabeth was angry with the dog, but after a while Flush became reconciled to Browning's visits. Browning had fallen in love with Elizabeth before he met her. He loved her because of her poetry. He wished to speak to Elizabeth about his love, but she was alarmed because she feared her father's anger. She was 10 years older than Browning and an invalid, and she asked him to remain on terms of friendship. Browning naturally followed her wishes, but he found this very difficult. Elizabeth knew that if her father should suspect Browning's attachment to her, Browning would be forbidden the house and she would never see him again. After a while, Elizabeth stopped having misgivings about the situation, and she became as devoted to Browning as he was to her. Browning's first thought about Elizabeth was that she could not possibly be such a complete invalid as she appeared to be. He decided that he would try to get her to walk. He helped her to practice walking around her bedroom. After many weeks, she was no longer a bedridden invalid. None of this, of course, was ever known to her father, who would have been furious, to say the least. Eventually, Browning suggested marriage. This was too much for Elizabeth, who knew that her father would never allow her to marry Browning. Eventually, a decision had to be made. The whole family usually left London in the winter time, but for some reason Edward Barrett decided not to leave London in 1846 when winter approached. The damp, foggy weather of London was very bad for Elizabeth's health, but her father refused to leave London. Browning told Elizabeth that she must marry him and that they would go to the warm climate of Italy. Elizabeth by now was disillusioned with her father, who obviously did not care about her health. All arrangements were made by Browning for a wedding to take place at the nearby Marylebone Church. Early one morning, when her father was out, Elizabeth, accompanied by her devoted maid, took a carriage to the church and was married to Browning. After the marriage, Elizabeth returned to the house to prepare for her journey to Italy. Nobody in the household, except her maid, knew that Elizabeth was now Mrs. Browning. One night, a week later, when the household was asleep, Elizabeth, with her maid, who was carrying Flush the dog in a basket, crept quietly out to a carriage where Robert awaited her, and they travelled to Italy. Elizabeth left a letter for her father explaining what had happened. When he read the letter, his rage was terrible. He felt that Elizabeth had deceived him, and he muttered, "She should have been thinking of another world." He ordered his family never to see her again and never to speak of her again. She must be regarded as dead. He himself never forgave her. After Edward Barrett's death, his bureau was found to hold many letters from Elizabeth which had never been opened. Browning's nickname for Elizabeth was the Little Portuguese, because she had an olive complexion. Elizabeth wrote many love sonnets to her husband, which were published under the title Sonnets from the Portuguese. Here is her most famous poem, How Do I Love Thee? How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death.